The morning commute. The screech of Brenda's alarm yanked her from a shallow sleep. 5:15 a.m. Too early. Way too early. She slammed the snooze button with a vengeance, burrowing deeper under the covers, willing herself back into oblivion. 5 minutes. That's all she needed. 5 minutes turned into 20. She bolted upright, heart hammering against her ribs. Damn it! She was going to be late. Again. A flurry of hurried movements followed. Teeth brushed in record time, a swipe of mascara, and the familiar tug of her uniform skirt. No time for breakfast. Grabbing her roller bag, she dashed out the door, the stale scent of yesterday's takeout clinging to the air in her tiny apartment. The city was just beginning to stir, a symphony of garbage trucks and distant sirens. Brenda navigated the pre-dawn streets with a practiced scowl, weaving through sleepy pedestrians and dodging rogue scooters. The air tasted of exhaust and regret. At the airport, the security line snaked through the terminal like a restless serpent. Brenda sighed, joining the throng of bleary-eyed travelers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the scene. She felt a headache brewing behind her eyes. Brenda! Girl, you look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, chirped Tiffany, a fellow flight attendant, as Brenda finally emerged on the other side of security. Tell me about it, Brenda grumbled, overslept. Again. Tiffany linked arms with her, steering her towards their gate. Rough night? Rough life, Brenda retorted, rolling her eyes. Honestly, I'm starting to hate this job. The passengers are getting worse. Entitled, demanding, you wouldn't believe the questions I get asked. Like I control the weather or something. Tiffany chuckled. Oh, I know. Had a guy yesterday complaining his ginger ale wasn't spicy enough. Brenda snorted. See? And then they all act surprised when you ask them to put their phones away during takeoff. It's like, hello, have you never flown before? They reached the gate just as boarding was announced. Brenda plastered on a fake smile, the kind she reserved for passengers she already knew she would hate. Gotta go face the music, she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. Tiffany squeezed her arm. Hang in there. Only a few more hours until your layover in Miami. Think sunshine and mojitos. Brenda forced a smile, but her heart wasn't in it. Sunshine and mojitos couldn't erase the mounting dread she felt as she stepped onto the plane. The stale, recycled air hit her like a wall. The cramped aisles, the too small seats, the inevitable crying baby, it was all too much. She found her station near the front of the plane and began her pre-flight checks, her movements mechanical and devoid of enthusiasm. The first passengers began to trickle on board, their faces a mix of excitement and exhaustion. Brenda greeted them with a perfunctory good morning, barely making eye contact. A harried-looking businessman struggled to cram his oversized carry-on into the overhead bin. A young mother wrestled with a stroller and a wailing toddler. An elderly couple shuffled down the aisle, their faces etched with the weariness of travel. Brenda watched them all, her impatience growing with each passing moment. She knew she shouldn't judge, but she couldn't help it. They were all so needy. So demanding. So utterly oblivious to the fact that she was already having a terrible day. She sighed, adjusting her scarf and steeling herself for the hours ahead. It was going to be a long flight. A very long flight. And Brenda Stern was already in no mood to be nice. Boarding passengers. Brenda Stern plastered on her most dazzling, yet utterly insincere, smile as the first wave of passengers approached the gate. Good morning, welcome aboard, she chirped, the words feeling like stale candy in her mouth. She scanned boarding passes with practiced efficiency, a silent commentary running in her head about each person who passed. Wrinkled linen shirt? Probably asks for extra pillows. Gigantic backpack? Definitely going to hog the overhead bin. Then came Mr. Peterson. He stood a little straighter than most, his weathered face etched with a network of lines that spoke of sun and wind. He wore a simple, neatly pressed shirt and carried a small, worn leather bag. He offered Brenda a polite nod, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Morning, miss. Mighty fine day for flying." Brenda managed a slightly less brittle smile. "It is, sir. Welcome aboard." She scanned his pass. "Seat 12A. Enjoy your flight." He shuffled past, a quiet dignity in his gait. Brenda watched him go, a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify, perhaps respect, maybe even a touch of envy, crossing her face. He seemed genuinely happy, unfazed by the chaos swirling around him. She overheard him say, first time seeing the grandkids in over a year, to the passenger in the next seat, his voice thick with anticipation. Next in line were a woman and a young girl, their faces beaming with excitement. The girl, all pigtails and boundless energy, bounced on the balls of her feet. "Vacation time," she squealed, nearly tripping over her own sandals. "Lily, slow down, sweetie," her mother, Sarah, chuckled, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "We don't want to start our vacation with a broken ankle." Brenda scanned their boarding passes, the girl's exuberance a stark contrast to the weariness she felt creeping in. "Welcome aboard," she said, forcing a smile. Seats 24B and C. She noticed the girl, Lily, subtly eyeing her up and down, her expression thoughtful. It was a different kind of scrutiny than Brenda was used to, less judgmental, more observant. As Lily and Sarah walked down the aisle, Lily whispered something to her mother, pointing back at Brenda. Sarah listened intently, then nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Brenda caught their eye, and Sarah gave her a warm, genuine smile in return. Brenda felt a flicker of surprise, a warmth spreading through her chest, quickly dismissed. She straightened her shoulders and returned to her post, her practiced smile firmly back in place. There were still hundreds of people to board, and she had a schedule to keep. But something about Lily's curious gaze and Sarah's kindness lingered, a small crack in the carefully constructed wall of cynicism she had built around herself. Coffee catastrophe. Brenda slapped the lukewarm coffee onto the tray table with more force than necessary. Another 20 minutes until boarding. 20 more minutes of forced smiles and vapid announcements. At least this was the last leg of her shift. She moved on to the next passenger, a man in a tweed jacket, face etched with a quiet sort of patience. Vietnam veteran, probably, she guessed, noting the faded baseball cap with the eagle emblem tucked under his arm. She served him a coffee, too, her movements rushed, her mind already calculating how many minutes she could shave off her pre-boarding checklist. Just as she reached the end of the row, a sudden jolt rocked the terminal. Turbulence, Brenda thought with a sigh. Of course. She grabbed the back of a seat for balance, but it was too late. The cup of coffee meant for the quiet man in tweed went flying, splashing across his chest and lap. "Oh, for crying out loud!" Brenda exclaimed, more annoyed than apologetic. Hot coffee stung her hand as she stumbled back. The man, Arthur Peterson, didn't shout or curse. He simply blinked, his face registering a fleeting grimace before settling back into its usual stoic expression. The coffee had soaked through his tweed jacket, leaving dark, spreading stains. The smell of burnt coffee filled the small space. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice a low rumble. He reached for a napkin from the dispenser, dabbing uselessly at the spreading stain. Brenda, however, was already in damage control mode. "Look, buddy, it was an accident, okay? The plane hit some turbulence. What do you want me to do, rewrite the laws of physics?" She grabbed a handful of napkins herself, shoving them at him. "Here. Use these." Mr. Peterson took the napkins without a word. He continued to blot at his jacket, his movement slow and deliberate. The coffee had seeped through to his shirt, and she could see the faint reddening of his skin. "Is it bad?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Brenda rolled her eyes. "Look, I'm sure it's just a little hot. It's not like I poured boiling lava on you. Just dab it off and you'll be fine." She gestured dismissively. "Besides, it's just coffee. It'll wash out." She glanced at her watch, already moving on mentally. "I gotta get back to my gate." Boarding starts soon. She turned to leave, offering a perfunctory "have a nice flight" over her shoulder. She didn't see the subtle clenching of his jaw, the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. Mr. Peterson merely continued to dab at the coffee stain, his silence a heavy presence in the bustling terminal. The smell of coffee, once comforting, now felt acrid and accusing. A kind gesture. Lily watched, horrified, as the flight attendant, a woman whose smile seemed permanently affixed despite its obvious insincerity, stumbled. A full cup of coffee, steaming and dark, cascaded over the elderly gentleman seated in the aisle seat. He flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but otherwise remained stoic. "Oh, for crying out loud," the flight attendant exclaimed, more annoyed than apologetic. She thrust a handful of flimsy napkins at him. "Here. Clean that up." Lily's jaw tightened. Manners, it seemed, were a luxury item on this flight. The man, his face flushed a blotchy red, began dabbing at the coffee soaking his beige trousers. He worked in silence, his movements slow and deliberate, like each was carefully measured. "Mom," Lily whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "That's awful. We have to help." Sarah, already observing the scene with a furrowed brow, nodded. "Of course, honey." She unbuckled her seatbelt and rose, maneuvering carefully past Lily towards the aisle. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, addressing the flight attendant. "Perhaps you could fetch some more napkins? This gentleman needs a little more assistance than that." The flight attendant, visibly put out, huffed but disappeared towards the galley. Sarah turned her attention to the man. "Sir, are you all right? Let me help you with that." She knelt beside him, pulling out a travel pack of wet wipes from her bag. "These might be a little better for getting the stain out." He looked up, his eyes, a faded blue, meeting Sarah's. "Thank you, That's very kind." His voice was gravelly, weathered by time and perhaps something more. Together, they worked to clean the spill. The coffee had soaked through his trousers, leaving a dark stain on the seat. As Sarah dabbed at the fabric, she noticed a faded tattoo on his forearm, just above the cuff of his long-sleeved shirt. It was a stylized eagle, wings spread wide, clutching arrows and an olive branch. Beneath it, the faint outline of what might have been a unit insignia. The ink had faded with age, the colors muted, but the image was still powerful. "Were you in the military, sir?" Sarah asked gently, unable to resist her curiosity. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "A long time ago," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Sarah didn't press him. "Thank you for your service," she said softly, offering a sincere smile. "We appreciate your sacrifice." The man's cheeks flushed again, but this time, there was a hint of something else in his eyes, a flicker of pride perhaps, quickly masked by discomfort. "It was my duty," he said quietly. The flight attendant returned with a stack of napkins, dropping them unceremoniously onto the man's lap. "Here. That should do it." Sarah shot her a look that could curdle milk, then turned back to the man. "Is there anything else we can do for you, sir? Perhaps a blanket to cover the stain?" He shook his head. "No, thank you. I'll be all right." He offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you both for your kindness. A hero's past." Lily's eyes were glued to Mr. Peterson as he shuffled towards the boarding gate. The intricate tattoo on his forearm, a vibrant phoenix rising from flames, pulsed with each deliberate step. "Mom, look! What does that mean?" Sarah followed Lily's gaze. "That's a military tattoo, sweetie. Probably from when he served in the army." "Served?" Lily's voice rose with excitement. "Like a real hero?" Brenda Stern, the gate agent, barely glanced up from her tablet. Another delay on the Chicago flight. Another day, another disaster. She'd heard it all before, the gasps, the murmurs, the unsolicited opinions. It was always something. Sarah nodded, her voice softening. "Yes, honey. Serving in the military takes a lot of courage and sacrifice. That tattoo is a reminder of that, of what he went through. Lily's expression shifted from curiosity to awe. Did he fight bad guys? Did he save people? He probably did a lot of things to help our country, Lily. It's not always about fighting. Sometimes it's about being there, about supporting others, about doing what's right even when it's hard. Sarah gently stroked Lily's hair. That tattoo is a symbol of resilience, of rising above challenges. Brenda scoffed internally. Resilience. Everyone wanted a medal for simply existing these days. She scanned boarding passes, her movements mechanical. A crying baby, a stressed businessman, and now this saccharine mother-daughter moment. Just another Tuesday. Wow, Lily breathed, still watching Mr. Peterson. He was carefully placing his worn duffel bag onto the conveyor belt. He's so brave. He is, Sarah agreed, smiling warmly. And sometimes, the bravest people are the quietest. Brenda overheard, but her face remained impassive. She'd seen enough brave soldiers come through this airport to fill a stadium. Most were just trying to get home, trying to forget. The rest were looking for attention, a free upgrade, a pat on the back. She'd learned to tune it all out. Veteran discounts applied at Chili's, not Gate C42. Lily tugged at Sarah's sleeve. Can we thank him? For being a hero. Sarah hesitated. Mr. Peterson seemed lost in his own world, a 1,000-yard stare clouding his eyes. Let's just be respectful, okay? We don't want to intrude. Sometimes, people who have been through a lot just want to be left alone. Brenda's fingers tapped impatiently on the keyboard. Flight attendants were paging her about the missing catering order. Great. Just great. Lily nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. So, he's like a superhero in disguise? Sarah chuckled softly. Something like that. Brenda cleared her throat, her voice sharp. Next! She needed to keep the line moving. Sentimentality wouldn't get this flight off the ground. Unexpected landing. A low rumble vibrated through the floor of the aircraft, a sensation more felt than heard. Then the captain's voice, usually a smooth baritone designed to soothe, crackled with a nervous edge. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered a minor mechanical issue. Nothing to be alarmed about, but as a precaution, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at a nearby military airbase. We expect to be on the ground within the next 15 minutes. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of your flight attendants. Alarmed murmurs rippled through the cabin. A baby started crying, its wails echoing the unspoken anxieties of the adults. Overhead, the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated with a sharp, insistent buzz. Rude flight attendant Janice gripped the armrest of her jump seat, her knuckles white. Brenda Stern, gate agent extraordinaire, barely blinked. She'd seen it all, heard it all, and felt very little of it. 20 years of dealing with delayed flights, lost luggage, and entitled passengers had calcified her soul. An unscheduled landing? Just another Tuesday. Her gaze swept over the waiting passengers as she began the emergency landing procedures. An elderly woman clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. A young man with headphones frantically typed on his phone, probably texting his mother. Brenda's own mother would have been more concerned about her cat than her daughter's well-being. The plane began its descent, the pressure building in Brenda's ears. She popped them mechanically, her mind a checklist of safety protocols. Head down, brace position, locate the nearest exit. She recited it silently, a mantra against the rising tide of panic around her. Outside, the sky shifted from a brilliant blue to a hazy gray as the plane dipped below the cloud cover. Brenda caught a glimpse of the sprawling military base, a grid of runways and hangars laid out like a child's building blocks. Security vehicles, tiny from this height, began moving towards the designated landing area. The landing was rough, jarring enough to rattle the overhead bins. A collective gasp swept through the cabin as the plane screeched onto the runway, the brakes groaning in protest. Brenda remained impassive, her eyes fixed on the exit door. Once the plane had taxied to a complete stop, the captain spoke again, his voice still strained. "We are now safely on the ground. Please remain seated until we receive further instructions from ground personnel." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional sniffle or nervous cough. Brenda watched as armed military personnel surrounded the aircraft, their movements precise and efficient. They looked grim, like they already knew what to expect. The first responders seemed to anticipate the worst. Then, the doors opened with a hiss, and bright sunlight flooded the cabin. A wave of heat washed over Brenda. It was not the tropical air she expected. The sky outside, she now noticed, was a hazy orange. The air smelled not of the ocean, but of smoke. Recognition. The ramp clunked heavily against the plane, jolting Brenda from her thoughts. She straightened her uniform, a practiced movement honed from years of repetition. "All right, folks, stay seated until instructed. We appreciate your patience." Her voice, though polite, held the steel edge of authority. The first soldiers appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright desert sun. They moved with a practiced efficiency, rifles held loosely but ready. Brenda watched them fan out, their eyes scanning the cabin. Then, he appeared. An officer, his uniform crisp and adorned with ribbons, stepped onto the plane. His gaze swept across the passengers, lingering for a fraction of a second on each face. Brenda felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't a routine security check. This felt different. The officer stopped abruptly. His eyes locked onto Mr. Peterson, who was still meticulously smoothing out the wrinkles on his trousers. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or crossed the officer's face. He snapped to attention, his hand flying to his forehead in a sharp, precise salute. "Mr. Peterson." "It's an honor, sir." The entire cabin went silent. Every eye was on the unassuming old man who had been quietly enduring the indignities of the flight. Mr. Peterson looked up, startled. His brow furrowed, and he blinked as if adjusting to a sudden change in lighting. "Lieutenant Colonel Davies," the officer prompted, offering his hand. "Of the 75th Ranger Regiment. I served under Captain Miller. He always spoke highly of you, sir." Mr. Peterson's eyes widened slightly. A faint smile touched his lips. He shook the officer's hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Lieutenant Colonel. Good to see you, son." His voice was low and gravelly, but held a quiet strength. Davies didn't release his hand. "Sir, your actions at the Battle of Phi Base Eagle, they were legendary. Single-handedly holding off that assault, allowing the rest of your unit to regroup, you saved countless lives, Mr. Peterson." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Brenda felt her own jaw slacken. This quiet, unassuming man was a hero? Mr. Peterson's smile faded. He looked down, seemingly uncomfortable with the attention. "Just doing my job, son. That's all." He finally pulled his hand away. Brenda noticed a faint tremor in his hand, a detail she'd missed before. A small, almost imperceptible quiver that spoke of untold experiences and burdens carried in silence. Davies cleared his throat, seemingly aware of Mr. Peterson's discomfort. "Of course, sir. But your bravery is an inspiration to us all." He glanced at his soldiers. "All right, men. Let's get this aircraft secured. Make sure Mr. Peterson's luggage is handled with the utmost care." A change of heart. The cabin air thickened with a strange electricity as the soldiers approached Mr. Peterson. Brenda watched, a knot forming in her stomach. She'd expected, what? For them to ignore him? To perhaps offer a gruff, dismissive nod? Instead, they moved with a coordinated grace, each soldier, even the largest, exhibiting a surprising gentleness. They didn't tower over him, but knelt, their faces earnest, their voices hushed with reverence. "Mr. Peterson," one began, his voice thick with emotion, "it's an honor to be flying with you, sir." Another added, "Thank you for your service. For everything." Brenda's carefully constructed world of procedures and regulations began to crumble. She saw the genuine emotion in their eyes, the deep respect etched on their faces. Mr. Peterson, his face a mask of quiet discomfort, simply nodded, offering a small, almost shy smile. The soldiers straightened, returning to their seats, but the atmosphere in the cabin had irrevocably shifted. Brenda felt a prickle of shame crawl up her neck. Lily appeared at her side, her expression a thundercloud. "Brenda, what was that all about?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. Brenda stammered, I was just doing my job." "The spill." "Your job?" Lily cut her off. "Your job is to treat passengers with respect, not to humiliate them. Did you even bother to look at him? To see who he was?" Brenda looked away, unable to meet Lily's gaze. "I didn't." "No, you didn't," Lily said, her voice laced with disappointment. "You saw an old man who spilled coffee and you treated him like he was an inconvenience, a stain on your perfect flight. You didn't see the medals, the quiet dignity, the sacrifice radiating off him. Those soldiers did. Why couldn't you?" Brenda's heart hammered in her chest. The weight of her actions crashed down on her. She thought of her curt words, her impatient sighs, the way she dismissed his apologies. Each memory felt like a fresh wound. I messed up," she whispered, the words barely audible. Lily softened slightly, but her gaze remained firm. "Yes, Brenda, you did. You were rude, insensitive, and frankly, disrespectful. He deserved better. We all deserve better." Brenda swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in her throat. She looked at Mr. Peterson, who was now gazing out the window, his profile etched with a weary resignation. He seemed so small, so vulnerable, yet surrounded by an aura of quiet strength. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo the damage she had caused. But the words wouldn't come. The enormity of her mistake paralyzed her. All she could do was stand there, the weight of her shame pressing down on her, a silent testament to her failure. The perfect flight she had so meticulously planned had become a personal disaster, a stark reminder of her own shortcomings. Forgiveness and kindness. Brenda located Mr. Peterson in his seat, his gaze fixed on the dawn bleeding across the horizon in shades of coral and rose. A weariness, deeper than mere early morning fatigue, lined his features, and a knot tightened in her stomach. This was the moment. She inhaled deeply and knelt, her knee knocking against the rigid plastic of the seat ahead. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice a fragile thread against the drone of the ventilation. I owe you an apology." He turned, his eyes, the color of weathered denim, met hers. No anger sparked within them, just a quiet assessment. "I acted deplorably earlier," she rushed on, the words spilling out now. "My conduct was unprofessional, discourteous. There's simply no justification, and I'm deeply sorry for the spilled coffee and my subsequent reaction." She paused, the weight of her transgression heavy on her shoulders. "I had no right to treat you that way. I'll understand if you refuse it, but I had to say my piece." Mr. Peterson remained silent, his gaze steady and unwavering. The silence hung thick, amplifying the nervous thrum in Brenda's pulse. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "Apology accepted, Miss Stern," she filled in. "Brenda Stern." "Miss Stern," he repeated, the name sounding unfamiliar on his tongue. "Everyone errs. The key is learning from it." He shifted minimally in his seat, a ghost of a smile gracing his lips. "Just remember, a little respect yields considerable dividends. And it's free, you know." He returned his attention to the window, the sunrise mirrored in his eyes like captured fire. Brenda rose, the weight on her shoulders perceptibly lighter. She smoothed her uniform, the starched fabric feeling oddly foreign against her skin. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," she offered, the words imbued with sincerity this time. As the flight wore on, Brenda navigated the cabin with newfound mindfulness. She greeted each passenger with a genuine smile and a solicitous inquiry about their well-being. When a child sloshed juice, she was quick to assist, blotting the mess with a soft cloth and reassuring the flustered mother. She carried Mr. Peterson's words with her. Her little respect yields considerable dividends. She became attuned to the nuances around her, the elderly woman struggling with her overhead luggage, the businessman anxiously scrutinizing his papers, the young couple entwined, their faces radiant with anticipation. Each person was a narrative, a life deserving of consideration. During the beverage service, she approached Mr. Peterson with a fresh cup of coffee, carefully set upon a protective coaster. "My treat," she said, offering a small, hesitant smile. He looked up, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Thank you, Miss Stern. That's most kind." He sipped the coffee, his gaze locking with hers. Definitely an improvement over the previous one. Brenda laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that bubbled up from within. It was a modest exchange, yet it felt momentous. It was a fresh start. For the remainder of the flight, Brenda consciously strove to treat each passenger with kindness and attentiveness. She listened earnestly, anticipated their needs, and offered aid whenever she could. The very air within the cabin seemed to shift, becoming brighter, more convivial. As the plane began its descent, Brenda glanced back at Mr. Peterson. He was asleep, his head tilted against the headrest, his expression serene. She hoped he sensed, on some level, that his simple words had resonated profoundly. She knew they had transformed her.